بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله على نعمة الإسلام والحمد لله على نعمة الوجود والحمد لله على نعمة الحياة والحمد لله على حقيقة الموت والحمد لله على العافية والحمد لله على المرض الحمد لله على كل شيء هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن لا إله إلا الله ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على محمد النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين خاتم الرسل والأنبياء أجمعين وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين وعلى أصحابه الطيبين وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين ندعوك ونسألك يا رب أن تقسم لنا من خشيتك ما يحول بيننا وبين معاصيك وأن تقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك وأن ترزقنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها In the name of Allah, Allah the first, the last, the truth, the ultimate, the beginning, the end. In the name of Allah, we begin another khutbah in another week. Still with the reality or with the clarity that comes from illness and that clarity that Allah gifts human beings when they are plagued by pain and when they come face to face with their own limitations and the humility of their condition. Part and parcel of reflecting upon your own challenges is to go beyond yourself and to think of how insignificant yourself in comparison to the universe that Allah has created. And if you are truthful with yourself, your own pains remind you of the pains of other human beings. And especially the pains of your ummah. Our ummah is hurting. Our Muslim ummah is hurting and has been hurting for a long time. When I was a child or a young man, I used to dream that as I grew up and as I reached the age of my father, that I will see an end to the pains of the Muslim Ummah. Back then, with the vigor of youth and the wishfulness of youth, I would imagine that by the time I reached the age of my father, so much of what I observed my fellow Muslims suffering from would come to a resolution. But as I now have reached that age, it becomes obvious that our ummah will continue to suffer until Muslims wake up to the reality of their condition. Not the reality of suffering, because that's obvious, but the reality of a solution to the suffering. The solution, the willpower to take affirmative steps towards a solution is very hard. It is easy to recognize your pain. It is easy to become engulfed and overcome by your pain. It is easy to dwell upon your pain. It is easy to reflect upon your pain and snap at everyone around you and implicitly blame everyone around you for your pain. It is easy to become addicted to your pain. But what is much harder is to see beyond this pain, to see beyond the mere fact of suffering, to affirmatively think of solutions and commit to a solution. Our ummah is suffering, but like the people of the Prophet Yunus alayhi salam, who were about to be destroyed, as the skies darkened and the clouds accumulated, and it became clear that they will be destroyed, they repented. But they didn't repent by word alone. That would have been useless. They repented by affirmatively reversing the injustices that had plagued their nation for decades. They went through the painful process of rebelling against their elite, of confronting the arrogance of those who have vested interests in the pain that they are suffering, and saying justice must be restored. And rest assured, I don't have to have lived at the time of the Prophet Yunus ﷺ to know that the elite must have been very unhappy to give up their privileges. And the elite must have been forced by their own people to relinquish what is not rightfully theirs to those who rightfully deserve it. The elite is never happy to give up its privileges. Those who have a vested interest in what is wrong never want to let go, but they must be forced to do so. And when the people of the Prophet Yunus ﷺ forced their tyrants to relinquish their privileges, Allah saved them from the horrible fate that awaited them. The lesson is clear. Allah does not change a people until they change themselves. But of all the pains of the Muslim Ummah, recently I lived with a particular aspect of the pain of this Ummah. First, I was thinking of the suffering of the Afghani people. Suffering that extends pretty much from the days of my youth. From the Soviet invasion to the brutality of that invasion, the enormous violence committed against the Afghani people, to the defeat of the Soviets and the expulsion of the Soviets, to the malicious interference of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan in the affairs of the Afghani people, and the rise of the fanatic Taliban and their brutality and their inhumanity, to the counter movement where Iran intervened ostensibly to protect the Shia of Afghanistan. But although Iran helped the Shia of Afghanistan survive, Iran didn't treat the Afghanis any better. So, between the remarkable callousness, if not actual brutality of the Pakistanis, the Saudis, the Iranis, the Afghani people continued to suffer. Taliban was a natural product of what violence produces. If you grow up in a country where death is habitual and common, where orphans number in the thousands upon thousands, where the displaced and homeless number in the thousands upon thousands, where corruption and poverty go on without restraint and without control. Add to the mix the criminal ideology supplied to the Taliban by Saudi and Pakistan, and the Taliban was an inevitable movement with all their intolerance and all their ignorance and all their vehement hatred to outsiders. Before the poor Afghani people could even breathe, the United States decided to invade Afghanistan. And like all foreign invasions, the invader imagines the people that they invade in highly idealistic terms. The invader goes in with remarkable amount of hubris and arrogance. And we invaded Afghanistan like we invaded Iraq. And we've killed millions of people. We've called our soldiers heroes. For doing what? No one could still remember what the hell we're doing in Afghanistan. Or what are we doing in Iraq? Other than the impulse in the hearts of Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld and Bush that we needed to control these Muslims. That Muslims are a problem. And we need to intervene to control the problem. Based on that impulse, we threw more bombs in Afghanistan than we threw on Germany in World War II. More bombs, more American bombs were unleashed upon Afghanistan than we unleashed upon Germany in World War II in 4 years of war. No one kept track of how many Afghanis we've killed. No one kept track of how many Afghanis were orphaned. No one kept track of how many Afghanis were widowed. No one kept track of how many Afghanis were brutalized and traumatized. In 20 years of occupation, we did what all foreign occupiers do. We created a puppet government. We continued to give the puppet government a lot of money. And the puppet government owed its loyalty to us, not to the Afghani people. And the puppet government loved us, not for us, but for our money. And so the government we created in Afghanistan was notoriously corrupt. Notoriously corrupt. In the time that I got involved in Afghani affairs, I will never forget the reports about Afghani government forces abducting and raping little children. They abduct children, dress them up like girls, put makeup on them, and American soldiers who reported these were told to stand down and not interfere. I will never forget speaking to a traumatized American soldier who was standing guard, hearing the screams of these children all night as the troops that we supported and funded raped children all night. When you unleash this amount of violence upon a people, and you unleash this amount of corruption on a people, when Pakistan continues to intervene for its own purposes, and Iran continues to intervene for its own purposes, what do you think the result will be? So after 20 years, what happened to the Taliban? Well, all the people that we traumatized and all the people that we violated, their people joined the Taliban. What happened to the Taliban? They became more radicalized, more fanatical than ever. What happened to the Taliban is that they became firmer in their belief that all our talk about democracy and human rights is sheer hypocrisy. I will never forget at the beginning, after our invasion, meeting with many Afghani officials. And the thing that they all kept asking is, America really going to bring democracy and human rights to our country? Do we, Muslims, really matter to America? That America is willing to actually create the type of institutions that would support a civil society and that would ultimately act to counteract the fanaticism of Taliban? 20 years later, the answer became very clear. The answer is no. American forces, as well as British forces, had a long record of atrocities committed in Afghanistan and of supporting corruption in Afghanistan, of killing and maiming and orphaning. So the Taliban grew stronger. And now that we are planning to withdraw from Afghanistan, it is practically inevitable that the Taliban will take over the country. Afghani soldiers who were always committed to American money are not willing to fight. Many of them are deserting their posts. Some of them are even joining the Taliban. And as a result, Afghanistan will suffer. As a result, the Shia in Afghanistan are still facing the imminent threat of extinction. As a result, there will be much blood and many tears. But as I reflected upon this, what does history teach us about countries that are invaded and dominated? How many successful models can you point to where a country actually manages to stand on its feet after an invasion, an occupation? Many people will be tempted to say Germany and will be tempted to say Japan, but they forget Germany was already an advanced nation before it was occupied. And Japan was already an imperial power before it was occupied. In other words, we didn't build up post-occupation Germany and we didn't build post-occupation Japan. They were already advanced, technologically accomplished nations. And our occupation was simply a pause in the way they conducted things and did things. We didn't create the advanced Japanese nation or the advanced German nation. They were already advanced. In fact, the truth of the matter is, we benefited from occupying Germany, and we benefited from occupying Japan in many different ways, rather than these countries acting upon a drain upon our finances. Look at the world today. Other than Muslims, who suffers occupation and domination? Other than Muslims, who suffers occupation and domination? Can you point out to a single example of a country that has been invaded by Muslims and occupied by Muslims since the modern age? This should speak volumes. This should speak volumes. Muslims don't have the simplest and most basic right, and that is the right of self-determination. Muslims can't decide anything that would go on in Afghanistan without the involvement of non-Muslims. We can't decide anything in Iraq without the involvement of non-Muslims. We can't decide anything in Syria, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Morocco, in Sudan. Muslims cannot decide anything about anything without the involvement of non-Muslims. And the non-Muslims that are always involved is either Russia, with its long-established history of sheer hostility to Islam and Muslims, or China, with its current policy, genocidal policy of instituting an actual Holocaust against Muslims, or the United States, Britain, and France. And the United States, Britain, and France see the entire Muslim world from the prism of Israel. If Muslims bothered to read what Dick Cheney wrote, and what Ashcroft wrote, and what Rumsfeld wrote, and what Bush wrote about why they invaded Afghanistan and invaded Iraq, you discover something incredible. They see the entire region from the single prism of Israel. If Muslims are okay with Israel, then they're good Muslims. If they believe that Muslims are not okay with Israel, then they're wrong, and they must be fixed. And the way that they can think of fixing Muslims is to invade their countries, brutalize them, murder them, torture them, destroy the heck out of them. And then when it gets too expensive, to withdraw and let them wallow in their misery, and then sit there and say, what's wrong with Islam? What's wrong with Muslims? Yes, the Taliban is a radical, fanatic, immoral force. But if you study the history of the Taliban, they are not native to Afghani culture. They were radicalized because of Soviet violence. They were radicalized because of Saudi ideology. They were radicalized because of American violence. They were radicalized because of Pakistani ideology. And it just so happens that both Pakistan and Saudi Arabia are close allies of the United States. And Muslims continue to suffer. And the Ummah continues to suffer. The affirmative, brave step is to stop squabbling like children. Squabbling about whether you are pro-Iran or pro-Pakistan, pro-Sunni or pro-Shia, and to understand that the Muslim Ummah demands, needs the power of self-determination. The Muslim Ummah needs the fresh air of freedom, the fresh air of social responsibility, that Muslims need to be able to believe in ethics and morality once more, not to see the world as simply one big playfield for hypocrisy and multiple standards along ethnic and racial grounds. Yes, our policies in Iraq and Afghanistan, as they are in Saudi, as they are in Syria, as they are in Morocco, as they are in Mauritania, as they are in Somalia, are deeply racist. We don't consider these people to be real human beings. We don't count their suffering like we think of the suffering of Germans or Koreans or Japanese. Being Muslim, unfortunately, for the policymakers in DC, is being subhuman. Not even the policymakers are conscious of this bias, but it pervades everything they say and do. That's why we can inflict suffering so easily and walk away from suffering so easily and not give it a second thought. As long as those who suffer are not like us. They're the other. Our conscience is not bothered. Muslims need to realize that whether you like it or not, you are racialized and dehumanized as a Muslim. You don't even have the status in the modern age of being an issue that needs affirmative action. Because go anywhere and say, we need more diversity in our schools, we need more diversity in our companies, we need more diversity. And they say, sure, yes, we need blacks, we need Hispanics, we need Latinos. Say, but we need Muslims. Say, what? Muslims? We are not even defined as an issue, although we suffer the consequence of dehumanization as a people all the time. People are talking about, how about all those Afghanis who helped American forces and served as interpreters? What's going to become of them? Yeah, well, probably the last minute, we're going to do what we've repeatedly done for those who care to study American foreign involvement and the way they handle immigration exceptions. At the very last minute, we're going to tell these families, whoever can fit in a plane, grab what you can and come. But we leave behind millions of Afghanis to suffer the consequences of brutalization. 20 years of brutalization. Every Afghani that I know has lost a family member in an American bombardment or another. Until Muslims can even just define the real issues, how are we going to wake up? How are we going to wake up? أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم نسأل الله يستجيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه يا رب العالمين. The Ummah is hurting, but we must wake up. I'll give you a very small example, a small but a grand example of what I mean when I say the Ummah must wake up. Can we all agree that a people without a past have no future? A people without a past have no future. Orientalist scholars like the late Patricia Crone are fond of telling Muslims, you are a people without a past. In the same way that Israelis dealt with Palestinians and said, you don't exist. You don't have a history in this country. We can come and settle and you don't matter. In the same way as the American occupier dealt with Iraq as if it is a country without a history, dealt with the Afghanis as if there are a people without a history. But you know what really hurts? Is that our history is being erased or has been erased in the very heart of the Muslim Ummah. In Mecca and Medina, in Saudi, Muslims continue to commit to going to Hajj and going to Umrah, and they don't want to think about the biggest crime that has taken place in the heart of the Muslim Ummah. You want to understand the crime? People like Patricia Crone and so many Orientalists are fond of saying, what is the evidence that there was ever a man called Muhammad who lived in Arabia? You are a people without a history. You say, well, our books say X, Y, and Z. And there you respond, well, other than your testimony, what evidence is there that there was even a man called Muhammad? The Israelis are digging up all of Palestine, looking for archaeological remains that are 6,000 years old, and demolishing and destroying any Islamic archaeological sites that they encounter. Maybe we can understand why the Israelis do that. But what is the incentive of the Saudis? The evidence of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam are the archaeological sites. But you're shocked to know that Saudi has destroyed no less than 300 archaeological sites. Nearly all of the Islamic remains that they found. They found the home of Abu Bakr Siddiq. They demolished it and built a Hilton over it. They found the home where the Prophet was born. They demolished it and built a bookstore over it. They found the home where the Prophet ﷺ lived was Khadijah. They demolished it and built toilets over it. The home of Amina, the Prophet's mother, was found and it was destroyed and razed to the ground. The home of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, the companion of the Prophet, was found. It was demolished and razed to the ground. The masjid of Bay'at al-Radwan, where the Medinians gave bay'ah to the Prophet ﷺ, was recently destroyed by the Saudis, razed to the ground. All archaeological evidence the type that Patricia Crone and her likes were asking about, existed. But it was destroyed by the Saudis. Now you come and you say, why? And they say, well, we didn't want the bid'ah of people worshipping there. Oh, I see. So this is a principled stand, right? Yes. Okay. Well, how about this? Recently, idols, an idol that is 4,000 years old, was found in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia didn't destroy it. It gave an award to the person who found it and put the idol in a museum. And another idol was found in Ha'ir, and another idol was found in Tabuk. One 5,000 years old, and the other 6,000 years old. The people who found it were given an award, a nice package of money, and they were put in museums. While the mosque where the Prophet took the bay'ah was destroyed, and the home of the Prophet was destroyed, and the home of the companions were destroyed. There is a museum in Saudi Arabia called the Janadiriya. That museum has the garb of King Saud, and the shoes of King Saud, and the bed of King Saud. Saudi Arabia, while destroying Islamic remains, builds museums to preserve the clothes, the shoes, the furniture of its kings. Saudi Arabia, while destroying Islamic remains, has protected the archaeological sites of the Jewish tribe of Bani Nadir and their leader Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf. That is a sacrosanct site. It's surrounded with a wall. Upon Israel's request, Israel asked the Saudi Arabian government not to touch the archaeological site of the Jews of Medina, of Bani Nadir, and Saudi Arabia honored the request. The entire Muslim world was begging Saudi Arabia not to destroy the home of Amina, the Prophet's mother. And Saudi Arabia went ahead and destroyed it. No problem. 95% of the remains have been demolished. A Hilton is built over where Abu Bakr lived. Not only that, but the home of Lawrence of Arabia, the man who led a rebellion against the Ottoman Khilafah and contributed to the destruction of Muslim unity, his home is preserved, and it's a sanctified site, untouchable. Islamic archaeological sites that survived for 1,300 years were destroyed by Saudi Arabia, as Saudi Arabia built 11 museums for pre-Islamic idols and 11 museums for the remains of their kings, the furniture, the clothes, even the brush, the comb, the toothbrush. So you tell me, who has the power of self-determination? The Hilton wants to make profit, so it destroys Abu Bakr's home, a historical site, a violation of international law. A violation of international law. No consequences. No one protested against the Hilton. But Israel wants the historical sites in Medina of Bani Qurayza protected. This lack of rootedness, lack of principles, lack of morality is the same ideology that has infected the Taliban. The Taliban's theology comes directly from the teachings of Wahhabi Islam that has destroyed Islamic history. And people come and say, what do you have against the Wahhabis? Why do you focus so much about the Wahhabis? Muslims who know that the home of Khadija and the Prophet, where the Prophet received the Wahy, they know that a toilet is there. But they're not bothered about that when they go to Hajj or Umrah. You come to talk to a Muslim about not going to Hajj and Umrah so that Saudi Arabia will know at least that there are consequences. And they look at you as if you're insane. Wow. As I spend long nights tossing and turning with pain, you say to Allah, Alhamdulillah, thank you. Because I imagine the pain I am in is not because of some medical infliction. I like to imagine that the pain I am in is because there are toilets built over the home of the Prophet. I like to imagine that the pain I'm in is because there's a Hilton built over the site of the home of Abu Bakr Siddiq. I like to imagine that the pain I'm in is because the home where Ali ibn Abi Talib lived was destroyed. I like to imagine that the pain I am in is because of the long suffering of the Afghani people and their betrayal by everyone, and the ugliness of imperialism, and the longing of the Muslim Ummah for liberation. Yeah, I was wrong. Liberation didn't come by the time I reached my father's age. But it is my firm iman, my firm, unwavering iman, that liberation will come. It will come. If only enough Muslims would understand. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إني داع فأمنوا اللهم اعف عنا اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم ارحمنا اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا يا علي عظيم Allah forgive our sins, strengthen our faith, guide us towards the straight path, and make us better Muslims and better human beings. يا رب يا علي يا عظيم وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه واتبعوا بإحسان وأقم الصلاة.